Back when we started the company in 1995, my business partner and I were a couple of snot-nosed kids, as my mother used to call me when I was younger. We were really good technicians, but we didn't know much about business, and we certainly didn't know much about finance. We were fortunate. We started the business off with a big bang with one big customer working with a large manufacturer down in Mexico, and we were pretty fortunate as far as cash flow. But early on, our accountant told us about the 2 times rule, and that's what we're going to talk about today on the IT Provider Network.
Welcome to the IT Provider Network. Are you a managed service entrepreneur wanting to take your business to the next level? Do you excel in IT but feel your business management could be better? Join Terry Rossi, where every episode he shares the skills, tips, and tricks that helped him to build a successful worldwide business.
In today's episode of the IT Provider Network, I'm going to talk to you about the 2 times rule, or what's more commonly known as labor efficiency ratio, or LER, and we're going to talk about some actionable ways that you can get more hours in your day. So the 2 times rule is pretty simple. My accountant explained this to us 20-some years ago. If you hire a person for $100,000, you need to get 2 times the revenue out of them. So you need to get $300,000 in revenue for every $100,000 a year employee you hire. Back in the 90s, we were a time and materials company, and we did consulting and software development. So if a $100,000 a year person wasn't working, wasn't earning, they were eating away at the profits. And having a guy like that on the bench for a month or 2 could bankrupt the company. This was so true that we had a spreadsheet. We called it the death of picks spreadsheet. We made a lot of hiring decisions based on that. Fortunately, over the years, our business has evolved and we're much more of a recurring revenue type company now. We don't have to worry about time and material billing as much as we used to, but we still follow the golden rule of the 2 times rule. Spend $100,000 in labor, expect to get at least $300,000 back in revenue. Fast forward to the last few years, we've continued to grow our business, and our business has continued to evolve. Our managed service division is more than 50% recurring revenue, and our enterprise software division continues to move to more software as a service and collect software maintenance dollars. Because we've continued to grow over 20 years, we're no longer a flat organization. Over those 20 years, our costs have continued to go up too. We now have a couple buildings, we have double the amount of licenses, double the amount of computers. And of course, the whole world is looking to get in on the recurring revenue model. So our spend is becoming much more of a operational expense, or OpEx, than a capital expense, CapEx. I know you guys are familiar with those terms because hopefully you use them when you're trying to sell your flat fee managed services. So now we have some managers on the team. We have some people that are not producing revenue, and we needed to revisit the 2 times rule and make a couple of adjustments. What we found was that the old 2 times rule that we lived by for 20 years of business was really labor efficiency. It was a labor efficiency ratio. And labor efficiency ratio, or LER, is still really a good measure to see how effective you are as a company, how efficient you are as a company, a division, or even a customer agreement or an individual employee. So what is direct labor efficiency? Direct labor efficiency is the gross margin divided by your direct labor costs. In simple terms, it's the 2X rule. But now we shoot for a slightly higher number, closer to 3, so that we can get some more efficiencies out of the larger organization. The higher the number, the more efficient you are with your resources. But there comes a point where LER grows too high and you're really stressing out your staff. So you really need to manage it so that you know when to hire. You can also find times when your labor efficiency is too low, and when you find that, it means either poorly trained staff or too many staff, needy customers that are wasting your time, wasteful practices or lack of procedures in your business that are causing you to have problems in procurement or service delivery. Something. There's always a reason. If you're not achieving that 2 times rule, there's got to be a reason for it. So LER is a really good metric to add to your arsenal. But I encourage you not to look at it in isolation. It's only one metric, and it needs to be part of your overall planning and strategy. Labor efficiency ratio. Take a look at it, see how well you fare. We measure it once a quarter, and we meet on it once a month to try to improve it. But we measure it basically for the company at once a quarter. Enough of the bean counter stuff, and I apologize to anyone who's a bean counter. But let's talk about some more actionable ways that you can get things done and increase your overall labor efficiency ratio. So in marketing, what can we do in marketing to make ourselves more efficient? Well, the first thing I thought of is that you should really have a blueprint. There's certain pieces of content that you might produce, either a blog or a webinar, perhaps a podcast. You should always be using a content blueprint. For a blog, I like to use an AIDA template. And I talked about AIDA in one of our previous episodes. It basically stands for attention, interest, desire, and action. And that's a really proven formula to grab a reader's attention, make them interested, make them desire what you're selling, and then call them to action to do something. So think about that when you're making a blog. Try to follow that format. And it's not a real tight format. It's just a guideline. Just follow those steps. Grab their attention in the headline, create some interest, desire, and then a call to action. If you're producing a webinar, it's really important to have a project plan. There's a lot of moving pieces that go into a webinar. You want to make sure you have a project plan so that you don't miss any steps. And if you hang in till the end, I'm going to share with you a way that you can get my webinar project plan that I've been using for several years. With a webinar, you also want to use segments. They're pretty common formats. So typically in the beginning of a webinar, you have the company and the presenter, and you introduce both of them to your audience. Then you follow that up with the meat of the webinar, which is usually or hopefully some educational content. And then lastly, you wrap it up and have a call to action. And it's really important to make sure you follow those steps and try to keep the webinar attendee engaged till the end. The second thing I would do in marketing is try to produce evergreen content. Not everything you can produce can be evergreen, but you should strive to make the bulk of what you produce evergreen content. What I mean by that is content that will be useful in the future, not something that's tied to the current version of iOS or that's tied to the current version of, Windows 10. Try to do frequently asked questions or how-to guides, something that's going to be around for quite some time. If you think about the food industry or something, if you were to talk about a Chipotle burrito, that's kind of a timely topic. But if you were to talk about beans and how they're healthy in your diet, for example, that's a topic that is pretty much evergreen. So think about that when you're making your content. I also encourage you that when you find a good piece of evergreen content, refresh it. So go back and look at your stats on your blog, what people are reading. And if you have good content, go back and refresh that. You can also see it on like Twitter, Facebook, your engagement. If you have blog content or any kind of content that's regularly engaged with, refresh it and renew it. Bring it back into your audience. The third thing I would recommend in marketing is that you develop content that you can use on multiple platforms. Now, this isn't always easy to do, but it isn't really that hard either. For example, this podcast is also a blog post on my website. It also has a lot of really good meat that's applicable to any small business, not just IT service providers and MSPs. So I can take this same piece of content, tweak it up a little bit, and use it on my own website for my managed services business, repurpose it on LinkedIn or any other platform that it might make sense to use it on. Same thing with webinars. You can take pieces of webinars and repurpose them as shorter on-demand training or lead magnets that you can use to draw people to your next webinar. You can take screenshots from them for Instagram. You can use the slide decks on SlideShare or some other content sharing platform like that. And you can also make a YouTube video out of it and then repurpose that YouTube video in written content or emails that you send to your prospects and customers. So develop content that you can use on multiple platforms. If you listen to episode 4 of the IT Provider Network, we provided a list of some really good tools for inbound marketing. There's a bunch of stuff in there that you can use to develop content that you can use on multiple platforms. So take a listen to episode 4 of the IT Provider Network. You can find that in the show notes or at the IT Provider Network /episode 4. And lastly, with the different platforms, don't forget to drive your followers to more than one social media platform. And you might be thinking, why would I do that? Well, the bulk of the platforms out there, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, et cetera, they never let 100% of your followers see 100% of your content. So you want to get them to follow you on different platforms and basically spread the love. So try to get them to move around with you on different platforms. Once you've mastered one and you have a pretty good following, then move that audience over with you to another platform. Lastly, in marketing, you want to reuse and refresh, right? So you've written this blog, you've done a podcast. It takes a lot of time to do that. You don't just want to use it once. So use a tool like Social Jukebox to reuse and repost your content. This is really, really beneficial on sites like Twitter, where your most recent tweet is only maybe available for 5 seconds. So it doesn't cause you any problems to repost that. Your users might see it again. They might not see it again. Reuse your content. You'll find that you get a lot more value out of it if you continue to reuse it. I keep a spreadsheet of all the social media content that I create so I can refer to it. If I create a new podcast, I might want to refer back to a blog post. Or if I create a new blog post, I might want to refer to a YouTube video. Always be reusing and relinking to other pieces of content that you have. And then lastly, on the reuse and refresh, market to your customers on all the different platforms that you have available to you. So you can market on your on-hold music. This is essentially as easy as recording a voicemail message. You can market to them in your email signatures. Email signatures are a great place to say, ask me about X, Y, and Z, or did you know that we offer A, B, and C? You can put that in the bottom of your email signature and get your staff to do the same. And lastly, you can market on your invoices or on any other regular communications you have with your customer. So moving right from marketing to sales, there's a few things you can do in sales too to increase your labor efficiency ratio. And that starts with the initial call to the customer. The way we work is we have an inside salesperson that's making telephone calls all day long and trying to make appointments for our outside salesperson that's going to have an initial appointment with the prospect. We've recently moved to doing them on a phone call, or even better, on a go-to meeting with video. And the reason why is that our inside salesperson, the telemarketer that's calling on these customers, can't really qualify the prospect as well as the outside salesperson. So sometimes we'll waste time traveling maybe a half an hour to have a half an hour appointment with a prospect that's not a fit. Often it's better to have a quick phone call first and then see if it's a fit or uncover some pain so that when we do have that first initial on-site visit, we're much more prepared to talk about it. So that's my first suggestion. Try to have your initial sales calls either be a warm handoff right from your telemarketer to your salesperson. That's my favorite approach. Or as a phone call, which is scheduled later. Now, the only caveat with that is I do find that prospects tend to cancel those phone calls much more often than they do an on-site appointment. So it's just easier for them to weasel out of it. So you have to weigh that, but try that in your business. The other thing is, I really do think it's best to use an appointment scheduler. And this is a way you can also get some more efficiency out of your sales team. Use a lower cost appointment scheduler to do all the nitty gritty of getting the appointment scheduled, working with everyone's calendar, making sure it's set up and there's some documentation set around. Don't have your closer doing that and wasting time on that. It also creates some separation from the salesperson, right? It makes you look like a little bigger of a company, and you put off an air of, having a larger presence. The second thing I would do in your sales department is use a quoting tool. And I like a quoting tool that uses a product database like Eatalize. What Eatalize does for you is it enables you to look up products, get their pricing and availability. And most of the major quoting tools have that built in. So use a quoting tool and really, really save some time in your sales department. A couple other things that are really good too. If you use a template, templates are great time savers and they provide for much more consistent branding. So when you're sending out quotes, they always look the same. They have the same look and feel. They also prevent mistakes. So by using a quoting tool, you're always making sure that your managed service agreement or your terms and conditions are included with the documents that you're sending out, the quotes that you're sending out. And they allow you to actually process the order electronically in certain situations. You can have the order signed for electronically and processed through your system. So use a quoting tool. The third thing for sales is to delegate some work to the admin person. Find an admin person, a virtual admin, or someone in your office that is a lower cost resource and keep your salespeople closing. Remind them of the ABC rule. Always be closing. You don't want them doing low value, high cost stuff. So use a lower cost resource for lower value tasks. This might be list cleansing or data gathering, appointment scheduling, that kind of stuff. So those are some tips for your sales department. In your network operations center, the first and foremost thing is you want to make sure you're using an RMM tool. And you want to make sure that RMM tool has a really good remote connection tool. So I say that with a caveat because Often I find that teams are relying on that remote connection tool and not using the full value of the RMM tool to be able to leverage the tool. Often their first reaction is to just boom, hit share screen and get on the customer's computer, diagnose the problem. This is not really efficient. So educate your team on how to use the tool. Make sure you're using it as more of a remote remediation tool, not just a really expensive screen sharing tool. Leverage scripts and automation. So a lot of things that you can do in the RMM tool can really save time in your NOC. Things like malware remediation, application installs and updates, disk cleanups. All of those things are really valuable and can knock a bunch of hours off of your help desk personnel. Also, use outside services to prevent support calls. So one of the biggest advantages we had back in the early days was when we discovered OpenDNS. And if you're not familiar with OpenDNS, it's a service that's owned by Cisco now. There's a free version and a premium version. They're basically DNS servers that have been vetted. They are aware of the botnet networks that are out there. They try to protect the users by providing better DNS that stops the user from accessing the bad sites. So OpenDNS and Umbrella, huge resource savings for your help desk team as far as malware, viruses, botnets, ransomware. I strongly encourage you, if you're not using OpenDNS or something like it, that you look into that right away. Save you a lot of hours. And frankly, I think the free version of OpenDNS provides exactly the same protection as the premium version. You just don't get the reporting and metrics. Some of the other ancillary stuff, like the ability to protect roaming laptops, things like that. OpenDNS, though, huge time saver. Same thing if you do like hosting or you have customers that have spammy type email servers, make sure you use real-time blacklists. So RTBLs, they're called. These are lists of known spam servers that you can block before they send spam into your network or your customer's network. So those are a couple of things that you can do in the NOC that are going to save time and make you more efficient. On the help desk or on your service desk, you want to make sure that you're using workflows and auto assignments. So one of the things we do in ConnectWise, our PSA, is that we have types, subtypes, and items. And when you properly classify a ticket, you can create automatic assignments or automatic workflows that go with a ticket based on that type, subtype, and item. So you want to make sure you're doing that. You're using workflows and auto assignments for ticket updates, for auto resource assignments, and for your onboarding processes. Make sure you're following the same processes by using a template or a workflow. In the same way that you did it in your marketing and your sales department, you want to delegate low-level tasks to low-level staff. You want to always make sure that you're having the right guy working on the job if possible. So don't have an engineer doing the work of a level 1 technician. Try to make use of the best resource for the job. You also want to build a network of contractors that you can depend on and trust. So for example, we don't do wiring or any premise type stuff. We have a network of wiring contractors that we use for fiber or for Cat5 that we can call on. We don't have to hire them. We don't have to keep them on the bench, but they're available to us. They're not competing with us, and we've known and trusted them for many, many years. So I encourage you to start building those relationships with ancillary providers that can complement your service. Lastly, in finance, there's a few things you can do in finance to get more labor efficiency out of your staff. The first thing is head off issues at the pass. You want to make sure that you're really staying on top of your finances and any delinquent or past due customers so that you can make a call and stay on them from the minute they become past due. You don't want to wait to find out that somebody's 90 days past due or 120 days past due before you're calling on them. The moment they become past due, you want to have your finance people reaching out to them and finding out why. You don't want to let your customers' problems become your problems. If you wait too long, you might run out of cash. You might not be able to make payroll. Their lack of paying you could cause you to actually go out of business. So make sure you head off issues at the past. And lastly on that, build a rapport and a relationship with your finance team and your customer's finance team. I touched on this in an episode of the IT Provider Network, episode 3, where I encourage you to have all departments building rapport and relationships with your customers. So take a listen to episode 3 of the IT Provider Network at the itprovidernetwork.com/episode 3. And lastly, just like in the service and support departments, you want to make sure you're using workflow and rules in either your PSA or CRM tool to deal with things like agreements that are going over the limits or past due clients, missing timesheets, PTO requests, any other HR-related things that your finance and HR groups are doing that you can automate, you want to automate. Again, low-value stuff using low-cost solutions, high-value stuff using high-cost personnel. And lastly, and probably most importantly, whenever possible, I encourage you to try to set up recurring payments with your customer. So if you can get your money on the first of the month without any aggravation, that's obviously how you want to do it. So whenever possible, set up recurring payments. Try to de-hassle the relationship with your customer. Use ACH or wire transfer or even credit cards. People complain about the cost of credit card transfers. The cost of someone on your finance department tracking down money is way, way higher than the cost of paying a credit card processing fee. So use automatic payments whenever possible. So that about wraps it up for episode 12 of the IT Provider Network. As I mentioned earlier in the show, if you want to sign up for our mailing list at the itprovidernetwork.com, I will send you my webinar project plan. It's a Google Sheets project plan, and I'll send it right off to you. It's something I've used for years to do webinars. I used it for WebEx when I started, GoToMeeting now, and it really will help you plan and process your webinar so that you put on a really good show. I'd love to get you on my mailing list. I'm not going to kill you. I'm not going to share your name with anyone. I just want to know how many people are listening and how I can serve you better. I did get a lot of great feedback this week from the listeners, and I do appreciate all of that. I know you guys were talking about sales metrics and service department metrics, and I'm definitely going to do an upcoming episode on that. In episode 13 of the IT Provider Network, I'm going to try to get my service manager on the mic and talk to him about the ways we measure and monitor our service desk employees. So I look forward to talking to you then. Thanks and have a great day.
Thank you for joining us, and we hope you've been inspired. Check us out on social media via @ITProviderNet and visit us at www.itprovidernetwork.com for past episodes, show notes, videos, and more. And we hope you'll join Terry next time on the IT Provider Network.